Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. We're talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is applique. A million years ago, I won't tell you how long, I used to do a lot of hand applique. And as time went on, my eyesight didn't get as, start to wear down a little bit. And I found I needed to come up with some new techniques with my machine that would give me the same kind of finished look that I could get when I was doing needle turn applique. So I have some quilts and some projects to share with you. And I'm going to pull up a few different projects and just show you kind of where I started. And believe it or not, it all happened all together on one quilt where I was doing applique from Pat Campbell, who had these absolutely beautiful applique designs. And I was doing it needle applique and I had all this extra light on me. And finally, I said, forget it. I had planned on doing this whole big quilt with hand stitched applique. And after I got one panel done, I said, forget it. It's not happening. And so I did the rest with my machine. And I used an invisible applique stitch. You won't know it as an invisible applique stitch. And but I'm going to show you what it is. It's a stitch that's on most machines. And then I kind of developed it a little bit different because I had my things that I thought that I really would prefer it to be. You can make the stitch bigger or smaller right on the machine. But if you have Stitch Creator, you can do it right in Stitch Creator and create your own stitch. So I thought as part of this today, I would do a little demo in the Stitch Creator to show you how I created this stitch, because I think that makes a huge difference. And it's something that we don't talk enough about. So the first stitch, and this is the one that I used in the video. This was the quilt that I made that was the very last applique design that I did by machine. And my intention was to do these beautiful borders all the way around. And I kind of gave up after a while. And I said, okay, we're just going to make this into a scrap quilt. But all of the things that I learned from here doing these Jacobean flowers in needle turn, it taught me what I needed to do on the machine. And so those are the kinds of things that I want to cover with you today. First of all, this design started with a very narrow bias base, stems that were underneath, and then I added the flowers on top of it. After I started going and doing it with the machine, I got more adventuresome, and some of these flowers are three-dimensional. They actually stand out, and they're just stitched down the center. And I think there's even more over here somewhere. Oh, there's another flower that you can kind of see. These petals here are three-dimensional. So it was really exciting to me to see that if you looked at this line or another area, that you really could not tell how the stitching was done. You don't see the applique. There's no satin stitches. And it was really very, very simple techniques that let me do this. I'll show you all these grapes, all these lovely long grapes. And look at this beautiful lily. This is a stargazer lily. So I love flowers, but this technique doesn't only work for when you're doing flowers. It can be working for circles and all kinds of different shapes. So we'll talk about that. So the next project that I did was inspired by this fabric. And when you look at this fabric, it's really very much an abstract kind of fabric, but I love the colors that went together. So what I did was I chopped up little pieces of these fabrics and put them together into shapes that look like real fabrics. And I don't think I've ever showed this before. So this is the quilt that I made from that. And so I knew what a delphinium looked like and an iris. And we've got the cone flowers over here. And all of these flowers, except for the poppies, I needed a couple of bigger pieces, came from another abstract type of fabric. But all of these florals, all these different designs came from that one fabric. I actually used that fabric as the base. So when you look underneath here, underneath the poppies, that main fabric is underneath there. and then I cut it up and chopped it up into little pieces. All right. And then, but look at the shape of the iris. So you can use coloring book drawings. You can go online. You'll see all kinds of different shapes. For the delphiniums, I basically cut out blobs of flowers to be able to do that. And let me sit down here. The same thing with the cone flowers. I was just looking at big pieces and trying to cut them up. And it is amazing how realistic you can make your appliques look if you're working with the right flowers. So that is one type of, all of that was little tiny pieces that I did with my machine. There's no raw edges. All the raw edges are turned under. And that's the trick that really makes a big difference. Now, a different type of applique is, this is a raw edge applique. Really, all I did was chop up different pieces of fabric and lay them on top of a base. And then I free motioned around them. So this is raw edge applique. Let me get you a little closer here so you can see that. And when you look at it, you can see the raw edges are there, but it really doesn't matter because everything's so stitched down with free motion that it's kind of hidden. So this is the time, we're not going to talk too much about this type of thing today. I want to go in and talk about some more, where you want a specific shape and you want to do, get the look of a realistic flower. So I made this as my sample to give you an idea of how this works. So the stems were done very easy. I cut strips of fabric that were 1 inch wide. I'll show you how it was done. And then the leaves, that's not raw edges. I used an invisible applique stitch after the edge of it was turned down. So the technique I use to turn the raw edges under depends upon the shape. Usually what I'll do is if you have a very specific shape, you can trace it onto your fabric. And I'm going to either back it with something like a no-show mesh. Here's my no-show mesh. That's the Inspire no-show mesh. And it's relatively soft. This particular one is fusible. So I'll tell you how you can use a fusible. But if you're using the non-fusible, that works just fine too. Now, somebody asked a question about how do you clean a garment with a raw edge applique. Once you're doing free motion over the raw edges, it really doesn't come undone. And if there really was a place where you got lazy and you didn't add enough stitches, that vest has been washed maybe 100 times. It is so old, I'm embarrassed to tell you. It's so old, I don't fit in it anymore. But it is, like when you think of it, it still looks fun, right? And because of it, the way that all the flowers were all put together, they're just grouped one on top of each other and laid on top. And this is where I learned the ability to do a collage where you do them on time. But I don't think that this looks like it's 10 years old. And I use it all. I wear it to quilt shows. It never fails to get lots of great comments. And so it's really lived up. The fabrics and the colors have really lived up fairly well. And I've been able to wash it without a problem. If you have a problem, it's because you don't have enough free motion stitching over the edge. Okay, so here's an example of some shapes that I made. I was, maybe you're making a sunflower, or maybe you want to make one of those bird in paradises. You could make some with different colors. You could see how quickly a design would come together. These particular shapes, I didn't even bother drawing. I just stitched them on the machine. I'll show you when I go over there. But here I have one. These have been flipped. So what you're seeing is this is a finished edge, and the raw edge has been turned back. So you take the right side of the fabric and you put the stabilizer with it, and then you stitch whatever design is you want to stitch. Once you've done that, if you're doing a flower, like maybe you're doing sunflowers, right? And you want all these petals, they're all going to rotate. And let me turn it right side out. That you're going to applique a center around it. Well, that is the easiest thing in the world because you can leave an opening at the bottom. And I usually take a straw, like some of these recyclable straw, the straws that are stronger that you can keep. And you put the straw into the hole that I left and then take a shish kebab cube. Now, I don't use the pointy end. And if you can, if you want to, but just get it so that it's not pointy. You don't want that to be sharp. All right. If you're going to use the pointy end, you just stick it down like this. And then all you do is flip it up like that. And now you've got your piece finished, right? There's no raw edges showing. You go and press it, and now it's ready to applique. If you are using the fusible, question is the using fusible machine embroidery stabilizer as the backing. In this case, I just used the regular embroidery stabilizer called no-show mesh. I personally don't use the fusible most of the time, unless I have a particular use for it. And I'll tell you when in a minute. This is just my regular stabilizer, my regular no-show mesh. And there's lots of tools for turning. I do not like to use sharp points for doing this. So if I'm going to use a shish kebab thing, then I will literally, I'll take it on something that's hard and sand down the end. So it's nice and strong, but I don't want it to be too pointy. But look at how quickly that shape got turned and those raw edges got turned to the back. So now you're ready for my miracle invisible applique stitch. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. You can take flowers like this, and if you wanted to make them three-dimensional, like maybe you don't want them all to be appliqué flat, you want them to be coming out and have them be three-dimensional, then what you would do with this is put another fabric. I did have one, sorry, I dumped it down on the ground. So I would take this fabric, I could put it on top like that, and then stitch around it. And when you're doing three-dimensional ones, usually there's going to be a place where you're sewing it to the fabric. So what I would do is the fabric that's going to be on the back, which would be this blue, I would turn it on the back, and then I would cut a hole through it and flip it right side out. So this would have the advantage of when you had the flower right side out, that on the right side, you would have the nice color. And on the back, if the petal was moved forward, you would still see color. So if you don't want the petals to be totally sewn down, but you want them to be three-dimensional, then what you would do is you would use a real fabric instead of the stabilizer like the fusible. Now, I have right over here, let me just pull this. Here's an example of an applique shape that is a circle. I've stitched it on there with the, and I'm going to go over and show you, with the circular attachment. So I have a lot of quilts. If you'll notice right over here, these are all quilts where some of them, now these ones have been done with the circular attachment. And after I had cut away the fabric, then I added a satin stitch. But this one here is a completely different feeling to it. Let me see if I can move it up here a little bit. So what I did with these circles is I sewed some fabric together. And then once I had a square of fabric that had the seams in it, some of them have 4 patches. Oh, no, they don't. They have 3 patches. Once I'd sewn them together, then I used that technique with the Aqua Magic. Now this one, when I'm doing this circle, I use the fusible no-show mesh underneath. So I put the fusible part to the right side of the fabric, okay? And then what I'm going to do is, I was going to do it when I had it up here, but let me just see. So I usually just cut a little piece, all right, away. I'm going to cut the raw edge around the outside, and I won't bore you with it. I have a finished one somewhere, but let's see if I do this. Just to show you how quickly it's done. And if you wanted to have these circles piece like I did on that quilt, I just really loved how beautiful they look, not having to have the satin stitch with them. So then I'm going to take this opening, flip it to the right side. I'm really not worried how big the opening is I cut. It's all going to be covered. And now when I flipped it, I'll usually take something like the very dull end of a stick like that and just drag it around the edge before because I can't go to the iron, because when I go to the iron, it's going to fuse to whatever I put it on, right? Okay, so there I go. The raw edges are turned under. I can take the block that I want to sew it to, and then when I go to press it, it's fused in place. And then you can use this invisible applique stitch I'm going to do. So when I'm doing something big like the circles, something where I know that it's very easy to get a nice smooth edge to it, then I'm going to use the fusible, because that's going to just stick right in place. I know it's centered exactly where I want it to be. And then I'm going to go and stitch it. If it's something small where I might need to press it to get a nice sharp edge to my seam, then I'm not going to use the fusible, because when I'm using the fusible, I have no ability to go to the iron and press it to get a nice sharp edge to my seam that I've done. All right. So I'm going to go over to the machine, and we'll look at the fabric for the circular attachment. And then I'm going to show you how I made the design for Stitch Creator. Okay. So let me just change my camera view here. There it is. Let me see. I might need to get it a little bit better there. And let me just move over. Sorry, it'll take me a second here. I'm just going to grab my fabric. All right. Now, so when you're using the circular attachment, you need to have your pin. All right. So there's the pin. Whether you move this left or right is going to decide how big your circle is. So if I wanted to make a circle, in this case, I'll use this fabric. I'm going to just fold it over. I'm going to make the circle the same on both sides. Or I could use stabilizer. It's totally up to me. All right. I'm using the open toe foot here. You may find that you like the OA foot, but I like to use the open toe foot so I can see that when they come around all the way that they're joined. So I'm going to put the center of this fabric in. Now, if I don't know where that center is, I can always fold it like this and just get a crease. Or if you've got lots of fabric, it really doesn't matter too much. All right, so now I know that the center of this fabric is right here. I'm going to put the pin in, and then I can decide if I'm going to move it left or right and make my circle. And it's a good idea to check like this. So that's how I would work it. If I was doing a quilt that had circles on it, that's how I would make my circles. And it's very easy. You just put your foot on the pedal. And usually all I do is just like to let it go and sew like that. Sometimes if the fabric is a little loose, I might put my hand over the needle, but usually I'll just keep it like this. And then it should join up, and because I have the open toe foot, I'm going to know exactly that it joins up perfectly. See how beautiful that is? Now, when you're using the circular attachment, you should not use the thread snips. So I'm going to lift the foot up. I usually go a little bit past it, and then I'll take the pin off and go and cut it like that. All right, I'm trying to get my hand away from there. Okay. So circular attachments, that's very, very easy to do. Now I'm going to go over and we're going to just change the view a little bit and talk about what makes an invisible applique stitch. So when I am looking at my stitches, if I go to my stitch menu, wait a second here, I'm going to change where I am. I'm going to go to my stitch menu. I should be using my stylus. When I'm looking at the stitches, the basic stitch that's on every machine is stitch number 14. That is a blind hem stitch. Now, it doesn't work very well the way that it is because it's too big and too long. So we're going to make an adjustment to it. We're going to shorten up the stitch length, and we're going to shorten up the stitch width and the stitch length. And if anybody asks, pretend like I have a stylus in my hand, okay? Because I have misplaced it. I'm going to just touch the tip of mine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten it up and make it much, much shorter. So you'll see what's happening. It's a straight stitch, and then about every 3 stitches, it takes a bite to the left. Now, I don't want the bite to be very wide, because I want it to be invisible. So I usually work at a 1.0. Now, there's different stitches, and I'll show you what this looks like when it's stitching out. I'm going to take off the circular attachment, and let me get a piece of fabric, and I'll stitch something to it. So if I was stitching this leaf to this fabric, I usually will start, if I know there's going to be a center to it, I'm going to start at the place where it's opened. If it was one that I flipped and doesn't have an opening, that I know that all of that whole area from the top to the bottom is all going to be stitched, then I won't start at the beginning where the opening is. I'm going to start somewhere on the side. And so I'm going to make this stitch very big because I want you to see how it works. Okay. When the needle comes down, let me just go over here. When the needle comes down and going straight, and I think I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit more there. All right. So when it's sewing the straight stitch, and I'll make this wider, I'm going to make it 2.0 so you can see it. So every time it takes the stitch, I'm going to stitch it 1, that's the bite, right? And then it comes back to the outside edge. Now it goes straight, 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 straight. So that's 4 stitches. And then it takes another bite. Now, according to how good your eyesight is, you can make that stitch much, much narrower so you don't see the bite. I always match my thread color to the applique fabric. If I have yellow fabric on top, that's the color that I'm going to use. The stitch is going to stay nice and close into the applique. And as long as you stay nice and close to the edge, it won't show. So I'm going to narrow that stitch down and shorten it up a little bit. All right. And so now it's doing the same thing, right? It goes straight 4 times, 2, 3, 4, bite. Back over there. And it's going to keep going like that. So you can literally count how many stitches it'll go. There's the bite. And then you stop and with your needle down and you just kind of keep rotating. And after I've done one more, then I'll show you what I did. So now I'll cut it so you can see. All right. So there it is. So when you're seeing it, you want to see the little bite, and the rest of the stitching should be in nice and close. Now, when you press this, it literally flattens out and you don't really see it. It almost looks like you've just taken a hand stitch there. See how that shows like that? That's what it should look like. I'm going to come back over for a second over here to show you my next. So when I was doing this, showing these leaves on, I'll bring you up close so you can kind of see it. All right. One thing that I thought that I should mention is I love working with batik fabrics because they do give you a very nice modeled look to it. But a batik fabric has got, let's see. I'll check the camera when I go back. What the batik fabric has a very, very dense fabric, right? It's like a 200 thread count or more. The needle doesn't go through it very easily. So you really, if you're going to use this technique on batiks, you need to use a very fine microtex needle. So when I did this and I did this stitch right here on the edge, you do see kind of like a little bit of a pull where the stitch is happening. If I did the same thing on a regular fabric, you don't see it at all because the fibers are so much farther and so looser that you don't really see it. All right. So whenever I'm doing this, if I'm using, if I'm appliquing a green fabric, I put green thread on. I match the thread as closely to the fabric as I can. I almost always will use an embroidery thread because I like the little bit of sheen that it gives, but you don't have to. You could use, one of my favorite threads is a 60 weight Metler fine embroidery thread. So a 60 weight is a very, very fine thread, right? There's a lot of other brands out there that have 60 weight colored thread. That's the weight we use in the bobbin when we're doing embroidery. But it's also fabulous for doing hand applique and for machine applique. It's strong, it's thin, and you don't really notice it. So an embroidery thread is 40 weight. It's thicker and plumper. So if you really want to make it invisible, using a colored 60 weight thread really makes a difference. So there was a question, how do you choose what thread color to use when you're using a multicolored applique? That's a tough one. I go with the best color, right? So what the closest color is. If I know I'm going to be using something like this and 99% of it's going to be on a light blue, then I'll do it light. In this case, I would do a medium range blue, even though that there is lighter and darker. If I have to make a choice, I'm going to go one choice darker than one choice lighter. When I was doing this green, all of this and all of these were used with a medium range green color, and I had a green bobbin thread in the bottom to show you what that looks like. Now, when you look at it up close, it almost looks like a straight stitch. I think you can kind of see there's very, very little movement to that stitch. It's just a little tiny pull over to catch that thread. I'm going to go back over to the machine. I'm going to switch over to the icon because I think it'll give you a little better view when we're close up like that. And I'm going to show you how it works in Stitch Creator. So the when I did it on, no matter what machine I'm on, I always shorten the stitch length. And when you shorten the stitch length, it's shortening the whole pattern. I also make it narrower, right? A blind hem is usually going to have a width of about 2.5 or 3. And the length of it, it's meant to be like hemming pants and skirts, right? Here we need it to stop more often. And so we're going to make that stitch length shorter. But I'm going to show you on Stitch Creator how to do that. So let's first look at, well, let's go here for a second, just so I can show you. All right. On your Quilt Expression 720, the Stitch Creator is down here on the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to go over to the icon because I think you're going to get better visibility over there. But here on the Quilt Expression 720 or any machine that has Stitch Creator, you can add individual stitches like this by just touching it. And now I've added 3 stitches. On my icon, I'll go and do the same thing. Sorry, here. All right, so there's my icon. And if I'm looking for Stitch Creator, it does tell me on the bottom, let me get this back here a little bit. On the icon, one of the things I love about it, and the performance icon's the same thing, it actually tells you in English, Stitch Creator. So I'm going to touch Stitch Creator and open it. And there is a blank screen. There are no stitches in here. So I'm going to do exactly what I'm looking for. Remember the blind hem, it had 4 stitches and then 1 bite. I would prefer that it did less stitches in between and still do the bite. So I'm going to make my own stitch. So I can either go up over here and choose one of the stitches, or if I go down to edit, I can choose this right here is 1 single stitch. You see, wait a second here. You need to get there a little bit closer, I think. Let me see if I can get that back a little bit farther for you. Okay. So I opened edit, and that is a single stitch. So if I touch a single stitch right now, my machine's telling me I have 2 stitches. What that is not 2 stitches. It's 2 needle points. The needle goes in the beginning, and then it comes back down when I've added that first stitch. So that's 2 times the needles going up and down. I'm going to shorten that stitch length. Right now, that stitch length is at 2.5. All right, I can shorten it up, and I'm going to make that stitch, let's make it a 1.8, right? And so this is how you play when you're working in Stitch Creator. You got to try it. Right now, over here, this is showing you what the stitch looks like. Right now, it only looks like a straight line. Now, I'm going to touch duplicate, and I've now got 2 stitches in there that are nice and short at 1.875. This time, I'm going to add 1 more stitch, and I want to move it. I'm going to drag it. I'm going to just take the point, and I'm going to move it. All right. And if I wanted it shorter than that, I could do that. I can move it back. Let's say I didn't want it to come out that far. I can just decide where I want it to be. Now, every time if I touch duplicate, it's always going to give me the exact repeat of what I just added in. So I'm going to add 1 more in. Well, that didn't work. I added 1 more stitch in here. Let's move it over here. All right, see how it's moving with the wheel? So if you feel like your fingers don't give you enough, like when you're touching and dragging, then you can always use the arrows here. So right now, look at my stitch, what it looks like. It's a straight stitch with a little cut out there like that. When I touch OK, I've now created a brand new invisible applique stitch that didn't exist before. So if I wanted to save it, I can come back. All right, I can go down to the heart. I can call it whatever I want it to be, and it's now a new stitch on my machine. Or I could create a folder for it if I want to. So I can call it invisible. Now on our older machines, we aren't able to label them. But on our new machines, we can actually call the stitch by its name so we can recognize it, which makes it really, really nice. Okay, let me check and see if you have any questions before I go any farther. Oh, I'm not seeing any more questions. Did that make sense what I did in the Stitch Creator? Anybody have any questions about Stitch Creator? All right, now, so what I'm going to do, I can always test out my stitch. I'm going to come over here to my machine. See if I can get it in there a little bit closer. All right. Now I can do it on here. And since I'm on here, I might as well, I'll do it. I'm going to applique one of these pieces on here. Now, remember when I was telling you about, if you have a piece, this piece is totally sewn. There's no open end like is on the flower bit. So I usually like to not start on a corner. I'll start like maybe somewhere like this. And let's see if I can get in there a little bit better. All right. I start somewhere, maybe in the middle. I'll keep going and then I'll come back and catch it like that. I usually just find it's better than starting on the outside edge. You'll also notice afterwards, I did go and do a stitch down the middle, but I was just having fun doing that. Okay. So here, if I was going to go and add that applique, I might know that I'm going to have something that's going to cover this edge. So I would just come in here and start stitching. When I put my foot down, the needle is right beside. So I'm always going to check to see when it's doing the straight edge, is it right? Let me see if I can get this back in here a lot closer for you to see better. Okay. There. So you notice I'm really watching where the needle is. When the needle goes down, it needs to come right on the edge of that fabric. So I'm going to do 1, 2, bite. 1, 2, bite. See how predictable that is? So I just made my own perfect invisible applique stitch. And I can go faster. Now, that is with the width of that stitch. I made it 1.3. That's the width of the stitch. When I come back over and I look at it here on the screen, you'll see that it says my width is 1.3. If I don't want it to take as much of a bite, I could go back into Stitch Creator and change it, or I can make it narrower by like doing this. When I got good at doing this, I could use a width of 6, and I would be able to get it to bite every time. When you're beginning, though, I don't recommend anything. Oh, wait a second here. I'm moving the needle over here. Let me get back. Oops, wait a second. What I did was I moved the needle position of the stitch, not the stitch. I want to get back to where it was. Hold on. Where is it? There it is. All right. Now I got to touch in the middle. All right. See where now the zigzag is? That's how wide the stitch is. So it's at 1.5. So I'm going to make it narrower like that, and then it won't take as big a bite. All right. So if I want it to be narrower still, I can make it narrower. Let's put it on like that at 1. And I think you'll be able to see the difference in the way that it stitches out. So now it's taking the bite. So it's going to come back. It's going to stitch along the edge. So it is important to stop often and let your needle stop down and lift it up. All right, I'll cut this so you can look at it. And I hope you realize I'm sewing this with a camera in between my body, so I have no idea how good a job I did. So here when I'm looking at it, at the wider stitch, you can see, I think I might be able to give you a better view going at the other camera. Let me come over here. Okay. So when you're looking at this, the part on top, that was what I first did on a wider stitch. And then down below, that's when I narrowed it down. And you can definitely see a difference, right? Here, you're just barely see it. Up top, it almost looks like it's a pin stitch. Okay. And if you don't know what a pin stitch is, that's another type of an applique stitch. We have a lot of these stitches on our machine. This is an example of a wool project that I'm doing that's using a pin stitch. And so that raw edge is caught, but this one's heavier. It's meant to be decorative. So I'll show you where you can find those stitches. So somebody asked a question, in creating an applique shape, do you reduce the stitch length to make the pocket? That is a great question. Absolutely perfect question. Because if you know that you're going to cut your seam allowance short, like this leaf, right? I've already turned it right side out. There's a hole here. I flipped it right out and then did it. If you want those stitches to hold in the sharp points or in the curves where you really have a lot of tension and you want to cut the seam allowance nice and short, then using a shorter stitch length is always the right thing to do. I usually will set the stitch length at a 2.0 or shorter. Okay. I will never do it more than 2.0, but sometimes if I know a shape is really intricate and I really want to make sure that I cut that seam allowance close, then I will use the shorter stitch length from that. So let's see. The grid, was the grid set at, what was the grid set at was another question. The grid was set up. I didn't touch the grid. I usually just leave it the way that it is. That would be a good question. We could go and look at it and see. I think it might be 10 millimeters is my guess, but I'm only guessing. So I would hate to tell you something that wasn't absolutely true. Let's see. Is there any other questions before I go back to the machine? All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. So when it comes to looking at, let me see if I pull up these other designs here. Hold on. I'm going to go back and get a couple other quilts. Here on this lion was a quilt that I did with the ribbon embroidery, right? And I thought there was maybe too much ribbon showing. So to kind of camouflage that and make it have a little bit of a different look, I made these different 3-dimensional flowers. And you'll see when I pull them back that there's fabric on both sides. So what I did was just take basic shapes like this. And this works really well for any kind of a floral applique. I put another fabric behind it. I stitched around, and then I cut it from behind and flipped it forward. You don't see where it's flipped forward because the slit is right where I sew. Wherever the slit is, that's where I'm going to sew. So it is really pretty easy. You can see all these fun little flowers. It's starting to take on a little bit of a Hawaiian look, but I'm fascinated by the way flowers can work and how you can put them all together. Now, if we were going to go and add this leaf, you can stack things, right? I could put something over here like this and stack something else over it. And when I do that, that's going to hide the raw edge that I showed. So that's why it's kind of important to think about what your flower shapes are, what they're going to look like, and then how you're going to use it. Because if you're just going to plunk it down, then you want everything to finish to be nice. But if you know that you're going to put a center of the flower in there, or that you're going to do something that's going to cover it up, that it's not going to show anyways, then I always like to take the easy way. You can kind of see how fun it would be. You could easily start to think about making a flower by stacking some of these petals. Maybe it's a tulip, right? I could make this a tulip. Let's put one of these in here like that. And then I would have to cover this raw edge up somehow. Well, maybe that's, this would not be an appropriate tulip leaf, but I would cut one of those long, thin shapes, and I could have the tulip leaf come right over it and camouflage the edge. So as you're getting going and you're playing with this kind of thing, a lot of it translates into embroidery when you're doing applique and embroidery, thinking about the colors you're using. But there is something about doing applique with your sewing machine that is just so much fun. The stems are cut on the bias. I usually cut them a 1, and I wanted to show you how that was done because that's a completely different technique. And I think if we've got a moment, it looks like we got plenty of time. So let me show you that technique for doing the bias, because it is something you can use in a lot of different ways. It is great for doing these individual stems, and you can decide if you want the stem to be wider or narrower depending upon how you go. So let me go back to my creative icon. Whoops, wrong one. There, wait a second. There we go. And I will show you how that's done. Okay. So here is my piece. Right now I'm working with the sewing star foot, which is a bigger, wider foot. And the reason why I like it is it's got a little bit of a bar that goes across. So it kind of holds the fabric in place. This is a 9mm opening. This toe is like a big 9mm open toe foot, but having that little bar there allows you to have some control over the fabric that's underneath it. And it works with the IDT, which makes it a perfect foot in my mind. And if you don't have the sewing star foot, it is absolutely fabulous, and everybody should have it in their feet collection. So I'm going to go back and choose a straight stitch, just a regular straight stitch. And here's the bias that I've made. And I may back up a little bit to show you. See if I can back this up a little bit. So the raw edges are on the left. What is important is thinking about how wide you want your bias to be. My foot is always going to be lined up against the fold. So my fold is on the right. I'm going to line up my edge of my foot on the fold. Now, right now, I'm going to take a very small seam allowance, and I'm going to have a very wide bias. Let me just do it so I can show you what that means. Because it's biased, you can curve it in any direction you want to, but I'll just do that. Let me just show you what I'm talking about here. So right now, my seam allowance is over here to the left, and when I flip my fabric, I have a very big seam allowance. Well, you notice I made mine much, much smaller right there. Look at how narrow that one is. So all you're going to do is decide how close, how small you want your seam allowance to be. And even if you want a very, very small seam allowance, you can move your needle to the right, right? I'm going to move my needle to the right as far as I want to move it. I have 37 needle positions. Maybe I won't go that far. Now, the trick about making a narrow bias like this is when your needle comes down, you can see I probably can move it a lot farther than that. Let me move it over a lot more. Wait a second. There we go. There. Now it's way, way over there. All right. So I've started sewing. What I'm watching is the edge of my foot where the fabric's lined up with the edge of the fabric. All right. If I want to start sewing on a curve, then I'm just going to slowly start moving it and make sure to stop. And then I can pick it up and go in a different direction. Now, this is the amazing part about this. Let me just go a little farther so I can show you how this works. All right. I can come down. I'm just going to come right off. All right. And I'll come to the bigger camera so you can see this. Okay. Now, this, when you look at it, you're going to think about, well, this is kind of weird looking because when I turn it over, I'm going to see the raw edge. So see, the majority of this is all free. And when I turn it over, it's so narrow that I'm going to see this underneath. But that's what the trick is. So what you do is, once you've sewn it like this, what you're going to do is, not where the fold is, but where the raw edge is, you're going to go. Remember, this is on the bias. It's not going to ravel, right? Let me do a little bit more so you can see. All right. So in this area, I trimmed away the seam allowance. So it's right close to where the stitching line is. And then all you do is you go to your iron and you press it back, and you don't see the seam allowance and you don't see the raw edge. All you see is that beautiful bias. And then you're going to go and do that invisible applique stitch to hold the other side down. Its question is, let's see. Did you use a bias strip? Did you use a bias strip sewed into a tube and turn the stems? No, I'm way too lazy for that. And is the bias strip raw edge? The bias strip is raw edge. When you look at this bias strip, all right, I cut a 1-inch bias. When you open it up, that's what it looks like. So I went to the iron and I folded it. This is my fold. This is my raw edge. Now, what I love about this technique is you can get microscopically tiny bias stems because you can stitch as close as you want to the fold and then cut away the raw edge. So when you're folding it back, you don't see any raw edge. All you see is that very, very, so look here, I'll come up. All right. There's the raw edge, which I hastily cut away. And then now when I go to the iron and I push it, you don't see any raw edge. And then all you have to do is stitch that other side down. So when I did that quilt, I wasn't so ambitious to make them too tiny, although some of them are kind of tiny. When you're looking at this, you can see what they look like. Let's compare it to the one that I did here. So they're about the same size, actually. Not all that much difference. But look at how I got all the twists and turns happening. Somebody said you have the best tips. Now, here's the thing that makes all the difference in the world when you're looking at doing an applique quilt like this. This is always what I do. No matter what I'm doing, when I'm appliquing a quilt, or I'm embroidering a quilt. Let's pretend these are embroidering. After it's done and I put the back and the front together and the batting all together, I almost always will stitch the straight lines first, right? So if there's a straight line, that's going to get stitched first. Then my next thing that I like to do is I will go in and in free motion, and I will free motion really close to the edge. So when you look at my appliques, they kind of pop off. They almost feel like they're raised. And that's because I've stitched in here really close. When I was free motioning this panel, and I did it as a panel, right? So I put a dark color in that matched my fabric. And then after I did the free motion, I would come in here and I would free motion in really close to the edges. So that made the vines pop out, and it makes all the embroideries kind of feel like they're three-dimensional, even if they're not. The curlicues were the hardest part to do. And usually what I did to do them, because I'm not into hard work, all right? I want things simple. So what I did is I went to the iron and I pressed the curlicues into it. I literally sat with the fabric on the iron. Let's pretend this was my ironing board, right? And so I would lay the fabric on the ironing board, and with steam, you always add steam, I would gently curve the fabric, and I would try and make it so that they would curve. They don't necessarily have to go all the way around, but if you just get that curve started, then half the work is done. And if you need to, you can, as you're sewing, if you feel like it's a really tight curlicue, what you can do is put a little cut into the raw edge. It's all going to be cut off anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But you'll get much better results by going like this. Looks straight, right? I have a piece over at my ironing board that I didn't bring over that if I held it up, it's got curves already pressed into it. And you know, I could have pretended like I did it like that. And if I put it on my fabric, you'd think I was just, you know, it was a miracle, but really it's the steam from the arm that does it. So when you do that, you're just basically where the fold is, you're usually pressing it so that you're getting that curve. And where the raw edge is, it kind of pulls in and gathers. The important thing to do when you're doing that is to add a lot of steam. The steam makes all the difference in the world. So for those of you that don't have Stitch Creator, you can use the blind hem stitch and shorten it up an awful lot and make it narrow. But for those of you that have Stitch Creator, I really think this is like a perfect opportunity for you to go and make this stitch and save it and start using it. Because once you get used to using Stitch Creator, you're going to come up with all kinds of other reasons that you want to use Stitch Creator. And unfortunately, I think it's something that unless we've got a really good reason to use it, we tend not to use it. So I was using the open toe foot. I was using the circular attachment and the sewing star foot. Those are the ones that I was using today. There are lots of other great feet and lots of other great ways of doing it. This is just one way in lots of different ways to do it. But I just want you to look and see how much nicer it is to not have a raw edge applique when you're doing a project like that. And it didn't take me any longer to cut out to make these and cut these out. If you have a quilt project at home, maybe you've got an applique quilt project that you know was normally done by hand. Well, you can convert it to a machine applique in very little time, and that quilt will take you months and months less time to get it done. So it's really just a matter of find the pattern shapes. All right. Either use the no-show mesh behind it, or if you think you might want to, maybe you want to make a tip of these flowers and you might want to have the petal come down like this. If there's any chance that you might see the other side, that's when you're going to put fabric on both sides and put the right sides together. Somebody asked a question, when you stitch the second edge down after you fold it over, do you need to stitch in the same direction as when you, no, doesn't matter at all. And as a matter of fact, I'll go over there to do it. But the most important thing I do, because I want good results, is after I've cut away the raw edge, like you can see how much wider it is here, right? I didn't cut the raw edge. here I cut the raw edge away, is I go to the yarn and I steam it. And when I steam it, it makes everything sit flat. And so it doesn't matter whether you start from the top or the bottom. I personally like to have the stitch on my right and that little bite comes to the left. But you know, I'm left-handed. Maybe that might be different for you. So give it a try. Give it a try both ways. But really, it doesn't take anything to do it. My only real thought is when you're doing this, if you don't want it to really look like, if you don't want to see the stitches, don't use the batik. Start with regular cotton fabrics. The cotton fabrics are so much looser that the stitch buries itself into the fabric much better than it does the batik. Use as small a needle as you can. So if you've got a Microtex needle, that's great. If you've got a 75 embroidery needle, then that would be fine. But the smaller the needle, the less it's going to distort the fabric and the less it's going to really show the stitch. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or I have no idea what this is going to end up being, but it's kind of fascinating to me. So I think I'm just going to keep playing with it. Let me look around here. I'll pull this up here so you can kind of see this one. All right. So when I hold this up, right, these circles were all done the same way. You don't see any satin stitch. You don't see the invisible applique stitch. And this was all quilted afterwards. You know, so I didn't, in this case, I did not even go around right close to the circle. At least I don't think I did. I don't think I did. It doesn't show. So, but it kind of gives it a little bit more of ethereal look to it than if you had a satin stitch showing. It just kind of blends into the whole seam. So I've always loved this. I thought this was such a simple kind of quilt. And it's really just based in a rectangle and putting some squares. And they're just randomly put in different places. So it's a very fun scrap quilt. And that's mostly what I work on when I do this. Even the floral quilt that I did, this is really, there must be 1,000, I don't know how many fabrics in here, but there's way too many colors of fabrics in here. I have one last question. When you see the loops, do you have to stop and sew the underside, then do the top part? When you sew the loops, I'm not sure. Oh, you mean like the these ones here, like the loops like that? Yes. So if you think about it, right, if you come like this and then you're going to sew over it, that fabric needs to be sewn down. So what I would do is I would sew to a first certain place. And if I knew I was going to cross over that place, then I would go and sew to that point. And then I would continue on from there. And that's, you know, that's an easy thing to do. That's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Because here, look at how tight my loop is. Now, that was a hard one to do because that's about as small as you possibly can get. But most of the time, I didn't work that hard. Here, I did a stem. So I did this piece first, and then I came over the raw edge with another piece. And so there is a little bit of thought. If you're copying a pattern, if you have an applique pattern, and you know that there's a lot of biased stems to it that's, you know, all around it, plan it out and decide. Sometimes you might need to do some stems first and then add some flowers and come back over it next. So the planning with an applique is really important. Here you can see another example of that right here. So right here, this stem and this, they were almost done at the same time. I had to do this one first to get it started. And this one here, you can think of, I came down here like this and I stopped. Then I added the stem in and then I continued down with that. So you really do want to put a little bit of planning into how you want it to be. It's always a good idea to, you know, if it's something you've never done this before, take a blue wash away pen and draw out your vine where you want it on your fabric. So then you've got a sense of where you want it to go. So we're just about out of time. I hope you've enjoyed our little foray into Stitch Creator and using the invisible applique stitch. And I hope you get a little bit of an experiment going with using some applique stitches. Remember, the fabrics make all the difference. They can do all the work for you. You don't need to be, drawing a flower or coming up with a pattern. You can just use fabrics and flowers that are already existing in there on your fabric that you have. So I hope you had fun. And I hope you join me next time when I'm not sure what I'm doing next time, but I'm sure it will be an adventure. So have a wonderful day, and I hope you give it a try. Bye, everybody.